Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, April 23rd, 2026, Earth Day. And today we will celebrate Earth Day talking about what astronauts see when they return home, soil work you can see from space, and what cities and suburbs can offer the environment. So let's do it. All right, happy Earth Day, everyone. Hopefully you all have your Earth Day outfits all ready to go. I don't know what those look like, but I'm sure they're awesome. I don't have a ton to report from the Earth Day Eve yesterday, except that I spent much of the day harvesting lettuce and green garlic for some accounts, which was fun, and I smell great. That always feels good. Romaine lettuce is definitely in its Super Bowl right now, too. It looks amazing. My Earth Day festivities will mostly be trellising the tomatoes and dropping off some produce and maybe harvesting some strawberries. That sounds like fun. So that seems vaguely appropriate. Then, of course, I'll coach some soccer this evening for the community to round it out. You know, that's part of the Earth as well. I love that we kind of have a day to celebrate the Earth, even if it often feels like somewhat of an afterthought as far as holidays go. It has changed a lot since I was a kid, though. I don't really recall it ever being like a holiday at all. Maybe it got a mention when I was growing up, but I have no recollection of Earth Day. I mean, no memories of it. I mean, go ahead, name your favorite Earth Day memory. I certainly have none of them. Now, however, there are festivities and kids learn about soil and birds and bugs and stuff in school and do like different Earth Day projects. I love that. It would be cool to see that just keep growing in the mainstream and give it even an nth of the amount of significance we give all the holidays where we just, celebrate plastic and waste, which is basically all other holidays. Anyway, we try to have something a little different on Wednesdays, and since I don't want to pester farmers right now in the spring, we will have Wednesdays be things like lives, interviews when we can, and in today's case, a little bit of a hybrid episode. The first segment will be all new material, hot off the presses, and then we'll revisit a couple older segments that just celebrate this amazing blue and green rock we live on. Cool. So, like millions of other people, I was enthralled by the recent Artemis 2 mission where 4 astronauts went around the moon to, do a lot of things, but primarily to test a bunch of stuff, to start working on how feasible it would be to get people back to the moon and all the effects it would have on the human body being that deep in space for any amount of time. Now, I'm quite conflicted about all this. On the one hand, I'm a nerd and cannot help but be fascinated by space, the physics involved in getting there and getting back, the teamwork at NASA, etc. I also, like many of you and probably many children around the world, was inspired and charmed by the astronauts who all seem awesome. On the other hand, though, I really struggle with this idea that we should be dedicating time, energy, brilliant people, money, and resources into space travel before we learn to, or just do, take care of the planet we actually already live on. And I think about that probably most when astronauts return from space. It's often remembered what they say while they're there, right? But underappreciated what they say when they return about what they saw, about specifically the Earth. What I mean is that almost all of them talk about the Earth in a significantly more appreciative way. For instance, Apollo 8 astronaut Jim Lovell said, quote, "The vast loneliness is awe-inspiring and it makes you realize just what you have back there on Earth," end quote. And his fellow pilot who took the famous Earthrise photo said, quote, "We came all this way to explore the moon and the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth," end quote. And it's almost universal that when astronauts return, they talk about what a rare and wild and beautiful and awe-inspiring and humbling thing it is to see our tiny, life-giving rocks suspended in infinitely vast, quiet, empty nothingness. Nothing. There's nothing out there. Just rocks and space and a small blue ball where we all live. Or as Artemis 2 astronaut Christina Koch called it, a lifeboat hanging undisturbingly in the universe. We are so deeply aware of how special our planet is. It's calculable. It's the only one like it in our galaxy, the only one we know has life on it that we are at least 100% aware of in the universe. It's been photographed in the community of nothingness that surrounds it. It's been seen and experienced from hundreds of thousands of miles away, where you could cover the entire thing by putting your thumb in front of your face. The surface of Mars is a horrifying, red, windy desert. The surface of the moon is a blank gray nothing. We have the most exceptional planet we are aware of in all of the universe so far, and we treat it like it's already a desert. And part of me just feels like, all of me hopes that one day we will discover it. Indeed, that we will discover the Earth. We will look back on one of those photos taken from space or actually hear the words of one of the astronauts and be like, wait a second, guys. The earth is absolutely incredible. What an unbelievable miracle we have here. We should do everything in our absolute power to take care of it and make it as healthy as we possibly can. We're told that moon travel is like progress. We're told that Mars is progress, but I don't buy any of that. Progress to me is taking a step back and appreciating what we have, cherishing it, protecting it, caring for it. Anyway, that's my Earth Day message. Discover the earth. And it doesn't have to be today. I think any day of the week is a good day to, just go ahead and discover the best place that we will ever have, ever. The best planet that we will ever see, the best planet that we know of, the one we're letting slowly die. With the hopes that one day we will find another one. Anyway, I hope that you all can relate to that a little bit, and feel free to let me know your thoughts. For now, though, we will take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll all join old me in some old but poignant rantings about, let's try the earth. That sounds like fun. Be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything, custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. Their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you put your best food forward. Schedule a demo at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show. This seems to be the week I want to try on new ideas that are just popping around in my brain and just see how they come out and hit with you all. It started yesterday with farmer royalties, which some great comments resulted in the comment section there. So we will discuss those on Friday. But today, why not planet-altering land management? But specifically, the types of solutions we need for a even vaguely sustainable future can have small elements, but by and large, they need to be enormous. What I mean is that in order to make a significant difference in water cycling, desertification, ecological health, and environmental resilience, small farms alone are not going to cut it. Don't get me wrong, small farms have their place. They are an excellent proving ground, for instance. They diversify our diets. I own one. I love it. It has more bugs and birds and snakes every year. Great stuff. So we need them, but also we need bigger solutions, and not just bigger solutions, but solutions that can be seen from space size solutions or, thereabouts, or solutions with can be seen from space results. So what exactly does that look like? Well, first, it doesn't actually start with land management or farms. It starts with what we stop doing. I know solar and wind and hydro and all those things have their issues, but the primary types of energies that we rely on here currently are not only incredibly polluting, but are relatively short-sighted. One day we will run out of them and or they will get too expensive for us to utilize. I'm not, of course, saying anything that anyone doesn't know, but non-renewable means that they ain't coming back. Wind, hydro, solar, these are forces that will be here long after we are gone, and we need to put energy and time into understanding how to better maximize them without affecting ecology and all those good things. We call them renewable, but we don't have to renew them. They are just existing. We need to collect and recycle energy that we already use. Roads that collect power, stadiums that collect fan stomping power, gyms that collect power from energy used to lift weights, a small secondary grid based on recycling some of the power we already use. And the reason that I started with power and its pollution is that in order for agriculture and land management to be effective, at least an effective means of stabilizing the planet, the job can't just continue to get harder and harder every year like it is right now. Next, public lands need to be managed better. They need to be managed for invasives, rotationally grazed in some circumstances, which is to some extent what recent legislation and executive actions in the U.S. have opened up. But those lands need to not be drilled and plundered for mining and economic growth, which is also what some of that same recent legislation and executive action in the U.S. has also opened up. We need to likewise take desertification seriously. Desertification is increasingly threatening much of the western U.S., due in part to urbanization, but also changes in weather pattern and poor use of agricultural land and water, etc., with something like 40% of the U.S. under threat, according to the UN, which means picking a front, a place where desertification is encroaching, and stopping it through good land management, pushing it back the other way from whence it came. Part of that is urbanization has to be restricted at some point. I know that's not going to be a popular opinion, but city limits must become the actual limits of a city at some point, which will require inspiration and creativity to ensure people get housed. But At some point, cities can't just keep growing indefinitely. We need to take wildfire prevention seriously, sometimes fighting fires with fire, i.e. controlled burns, but likewise, just better large-scale land management overall, not just farms. Then we just need more ecological farming overall, across the board, lots of it. I've been impressed and encouraged by what I've seen on small farms, how they are able to change the ecology and soil health and vibrancy of an area, both environmentally and economically as well, but that needs to ultimately be 1,000x, if not a million times bigger. Not intensive vegetable farms all the way across, obviously, that would be a lot of lettuce, but larger scale caloric agriculture that embraces cover cropping, hedges, some agroforestry, crop diversity, and incentivizing maybe livestock managers and croppers to work together to get more uses out of a single parcel of land and discourage the most polluting versions of livestock management, obviously. I have likewise been interested in efforts to stop desertification to stave off the expanding Sahara in places like Nigeria. In fact, although there is some dispute about causes, like there always are with every environmental history, around 8,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert. It was humid and rich with life, and a shift in weather due to a tilt in the Earth's axis apparently caused the monsoons to shift, helping to lead to the great desert we know today. Some have proposed that human activity at the time may have accelerated the decline, but there is research that also suggests that human activity, grazing and land management for thousands of years, actually helped stave off the desertification by 500 years. Quote, increasing human population and sustainable pastoralism did not accelerate and may have even delayed the decline of the Green Sahara. End quote. Again, we like to think of humans as this consistent negative entity on the earth, but humans do have the ability that we proved for thousands of years to improve the land they live on, if they want to. Notably, or poignantly, the Sahara is roughly the same size as the United States, but basically it can be done. And to some extent it is being done there in parts, which is very cool, but it needs to be done everywhere. When I say we should be able to see the effects of our work from space, I just mean green. This rock, this country, this continent should be mostly green and blue with large white ice sheets on the top and bottom, and little else. We should be able to see all that brown shrink, not grow. Is this dumb and idealistic or unrealistic? Yeah, duh, of course it is. It has to be. At some point, we have to start treating the declining health of our Earth seriously because it ain't going to be solved passively or by individual choices or just by ignoring it. But it can be done. We just have to make the decision collectively that we want it to be done for our kids and our grandkids, that it will be hard, but it will be beautiful and productive. In the 1940s, people who were not at the war had to make sacrifices at home, using less and growing victory gardens. We need that kind of level of patriotism again with much bigger victory gardens. This time, though, to fight for the health of the land we stand on. I have found myself more and more interested in larger scale ecological solutions, like, for instance, staving off the growing Sahara. And we'll talk about them more in time as I come across them. But they need funding and public support. Like, we have to get behind these ideas or nothing is going to change. More than anything, this place just needs people to care. So much so that they're willing to take on the unrealistic, because what's really unrealistic is thinking that we can just keep going on like this and that everything's going to be fine, because that is the most unrealistic thing. Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit rimmel.com today to get growing. All right, back to the show. All right, so right before our Christmas break, I talked a little bit about where to draw the line in ag with technology, but didn't really get to share any of the feedback from that episode. And anyway, somewhat offhandedly, I said something to the effect of people aren't going to just put down their phones and move out of cities and everything else it would require to save the planet from complete depletion. We as a society just aren't going to change that significantly, at least not rapidly enough, and no amount of suggesting we all should will make it happen. And Weiss Fox wrote a good response to that comment, quote, "I think it's very inaccurate to say that people moving out of cities is necessary or even beneficial for protecting the environment or reducing resource usage. If you took the population of New York City and gave them all yard/farm-sized pieces of land, it would be environmentally catastrophic. Most yard/farms are no better ecologically than parking lots, if no worse. And while there are ways to minimize the impact, planting native plants, not having a fescue lawn, not using fossil fuel fertilizers or indiscriminate insecticides, etc., it would destroy huge swaths of wilderness and drastically increase car usage, end quote. Great. Now, I was more referring to leaving the city more out of like inspiration than because cities are inherently terrible. But this comment is good and correct in the sense that if 8 million people just like poured out of New York City and into the rural area around there, that would be a wild stress on the environment. However, this got me thinking about the role cities can or do play in the environment. To be sure, cities are extremely consumptive and generate a profound amount of waste, use a profound amount of energy, but they are relatively efficient uses of space as well. The compactness also makes them ripe for efficiency improvements in a way that rural areas are not as easy to improve upon efficiency-wise for how spread out everything is. Like the commenter mentioned, driving, for instance. Providing hundreds of people with renewable energy in the countryside, to use another example, can simply be a bigger lift than providing a single building in the city with renewable energy if you put solar panels on the roof and all those sorts of things, at least theoretically speaking. Moreover, the potential for cities to be energy generators or capturers and not just energy users, capturing the energy of footsteps and bikes and cars and gyms and wind and sun and rain and all the things, or waste creators, is pretty high. But the challenge is that policies are slow, funding is low, so cities often don't meet their potential and become waste centers and not contributors. In that way, I don't think people would have to leave cities to join the ecological movement. They would just have to get inspired locally to refashion their city into something quote unquote greener, literally and figuratively, I suppose, because rural life is not going to be for everyone. And as the commenter notes, can't be for everyone, at least not immediately. Certainly there is room for more people to quote unquote go farming, as it were, but there is also a lot of space to improve the infrastructure we currently have in our cities to capture some of the potential of having that many people so close together, to farm the rooftops, find ways to generate and collect energy, all the things. I'm idealistic like that, but I have no general issue with the idea of cities. But that's especially true if and when cities find ways to contribute. Because what I don't love about cities, and what I think all cities need to hear, is that they cannot just absorb and use the food and power generated by rural America and return nothing. They can't expect farmers and rural folks to give up their farmland to data centers and power plants, which I saw some no data center signs here in Kentucky yesterday because, yeah, people's lazy obsession with AI is going to sit itself in our rural laps. So, but anyway, they can't do that and not themselves offer something back in return. You know, the light pollution, for instance, that interrupts the migrations of birds we need on farms. Cities cannot continue the waste creation without composting their food scraps. They must find a way to contribute to the soil, the air, the energy, and their local ecology. Everyone has a duty to the land, no matter where they live. So whether or not cities are bad isn't really the right question. The right question is, what are we all willing to give back so we aren't just drains on the planet that supports us, regardless of where we live? All right, so today is going to have a really complete Feedback Friday vibe because what I want to talk about today is somewhat inspired by what I talked about last week, in that cities need to do better environmentally. After my comments that day, I noticed an interesting debate break out in the comments section. Specifically, in last Friday's episode, I said that I have no general issue with the idea of cities, but that's especially true if and when cities find ways to contribute environmentally. Because what I don't love about cities, I said, and what I think cities need to hear, is that they cannot just absorb and use the food and power generated by rural America and return nothing. That was the quote that seemed to get the most reaction. And I followed that by saying that cities can't expect farmers and rural folks to give up their farmland to data centers and power plants and not themselves offer something back in return. And anyway, some folks took issue with that, and I think not without reason. Some folks suggested that cities return economy to the rural countryside by buying the food that they are producing, which agreed, that is a thing that cities do. Some folks mentioned science, hospitals, etc. as things cities offer, and no argument there. Cities do all that, but that wasn't what I was really talking about, which isn't on you. That's on me. I sort of drug my point out over the course of that whole segment, so it got lost a little bit. But I was talking strictly about the environment and ecology and not economy or science or art, etc. Like I said in that episode, cities are largely a more efficient use of space, certainly than suburbs and many rural communities, and the research largely backs that up. One study of 8,000 households in Austria, for instance, found, quote, even when controlling for other socioeconomic factors, including income, we found that people in semi-urban areas in Austria emit around 8% more CO2 than those in cities, and people in rural areas around 4% more, end quote. In terms of energy efficiency, in other words, cities are largely better than even where I live. And without question, some cities are designed better than others, and some whole countries, for that matter, are designed better than others. Like when you look at a map of, say, the Netherlands, it's full of large population centers surrounded by really intensive agriculture. Now, the Netherlands is not without its own problems, including excess nitrogen issues, but the design is highly efficient. Less urban sprawl, more concentrated urban areas, and thus more energy efficient. In terms of cities, I referenced eating the food and returning nothing because I mean that literally. In many cities, the food scraps leave with the garbage, often to be piled up on some foreign land or lost to the atmosphere or the ocean or whatever. I referenced the energy and data because the farmer doesn't see the money that is used to pay for the energy, primarily just the environmental effects. Data centers are not likely to hire many people while also driving up the price of land, so it's a double whammy when you think that the land access is already a major issue. So telling a farmer that, sorry, your water and air is ruined, but I paid for it, isn't super helpful or constructive, especially when cities hold so much potential to generate their own energy or house their own data centers, possibly enough to give some of that back to the countryside too, or at least to not rely on the countryside for more than food. To be clear, I am significantly and consistently harder on farmers about their obligation to the land than I ever am on my city friends. I mean, it's basically every show. But cities, albeit more efficient in terms of their energy use, again, no argument there, especially here in the US, are still significantly under-optimized and could do more environmentally. As I talked about in that show, beyond not returning fertility or creating their own energy, light pollution is having serious environmental effects that affect the migratory habits of birds and insects, for instance, which ultimately affects farmers. If cities could build their own energy creation and data storage, then the air and water around farms would stay safer, so farms could continue to reliably, 1, afford their land, 2, grow nutritious food for cities, and 3, have clean air and water for themselves and the wildlife and ecology. In those comments, there was a lot of talk of this like city/rural divide, and I just don't see it that way. I think most people in the countryside recognize the value of cities economically, but perhaps the big piece that's missing is for cities to recognize the environmental value they could have to farmers. Now, I didn't leave myself much time to talk about suburbs here, but for the suburbs, because again, I hold everyone accountable on this show, all of that same stuff applies, only multiplied because the inefficiencies of suburbs. The nice thing for those areas is that they generally have lawns where natives can be planted, for instance, that cities don't have. Light pollution and food waste and energy waste are still profound issues in suburbs, but the opportunity is much more in the ecological realm than it can be for cities. It's just not a physical feature of cities as much. And then, of course, is myself, and my semi-rural area could do considerably better than we do. Absolutely, no question. However, our opportunity goes beyond just reduce, reuse, recycle, right? We also have the opportunity to sequester carbon, to grow food and ecology and soil that, suburbs and cities don't really and can't really. I think all of these areas can work in some amount of tandem, utilizing their infrastructure and optimizing their land space. But what isn't helpful is when people think doing less bad than someone else is doing anything. The world, ecology, the environment, it's all a bit like a bank account that we all have access to. In certain ways, cities take a smaller amount than rural communities, and rural communities take a smaller amount than suburbs, but we can't just take. We all have an obligation to also return something to the bank account. And although farmers can do more returning than others and should, they can't do it all. That's not fair, and it's not going to work. Everyone who withdraws from the bank has to return something, perhaps proportionally to what is taken, though if you can find ways to return more, all the better, and I think cities have a lot of potential to return a lot, and suburbs even more so. All right, I hope you all enjoyed that little Earth Day special. As always, give us your thoughts and do something nice for this tiny little planet we all share. But that's it for this Wednesday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you could reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-till-growers.com. Big thank you to Michelle. A big thank you to the No-Till Growers Board of Directors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-till-growers.com to support this work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-till-growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of April, you get a shout on the show. So big shout outs today to, there were no new signups or bump ups yesterday, but it's all good. We'll just leave Lydia hanging on her cruise and be back tomorrow to see what the commotion was all about. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening and caring about this amazing rock we live on. Thank you all. See you tomorrow. Bye.
My new website's been getting a lot of attention lately, and here's my secret. I used Wix Harmony. It's one of my favorite tools because it feels like such a natural way to create, and I have so much control over my website. I can just tell Aria, my AI agent, to create whatever I'm imagining in my head, or I can click anywhere on my site and change things myself. Try it for free at wix.com/harmony. That's wix.com/harmony.